Hi, this is Robin Trott. I am University of Minnesota Extension Educator in Douglas County. It looks like it is noon on this glorious kind of overcast April 21st. And today we're going to talk about indestructible houseplants for your health and well-being. And if you're like me, you just adore houseplants. Your house is full of them and you're always looking for new ones. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the health benefits of houseplants, look at some research on that. We're going to talk about indestructible houseplants that are easy to grow, and then some of the roadblocks to keeping your houseplants healthy. So one of the things that you might have heard is that houseplants help to fight colds. They help upper respiratory infections. And research has shown that indoor plants decreased cough, sore throats, and fatigue because they increase the humidity level and they decrease dust in the air. So right away, they create this healthier environment in which you are going to be less susceptible to these winter colds or upper respiratory problems. The other thing that research has looked at, is plants foster improved medical outcomes. So the research shows that those people who are hospitalized, if they have houseplants in the room, they heal faster, their attitude is better, and they just generally have better outcomes than those who don't have houseplants in the room. So really good excuse to send a houseplant if you know somebody in the hospital. Plants make you happy. When houseplants are placed in a room, people's blood pressure becomes significantly lower, and they find tasks less stressful. This is a monkey plant. I just love it because it is smiling at you. Not one of the indestructible houseplants, but certainly a lot of fun. Texas A&M have found that plants enhance cognitive function. They improve concentration. They improve memory. They make goal achievement easier and better. They create a heightened sense of attention, and they're linked with creativity as well. So having all of these houseplants in your house, or even just a bouquet of flowers, can just improve your general cognitive function, your overall happiness, and your health. So houseplants are a great thing to have. If you don't have a houseplant, you're looking for a new houseplant, don't hesitate to bring one in. And I will give you some clues about some of those houseplants that are a little easier to take care of. Now, I am going to stop here for just a second because what I forgot to mention is if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. There is a chat that you can put your questions in. I will address them all at the end of the session. So let's continue. Now, here's the really interesting thing, is NASA did this study about plants fighting pollution indoors. And part of this was for the International Space Station. They wanted to see how they could improve the indoor air environment, air quality indoors, by including houseplants. And they found out that all of these different plants will remove certain chemicals, certain pollutants in the air. So benzene is one, and you can see the list. I'm not going to read this all to you, but we have all sorts of products in our house, all sorts of things in our house that do release certain pollutants. And this list of houseplants, they remove those pollutants. So you can see different plants, peace lilies, they remove pollutants that are from printing inks. Many of us have printers, or certain paints, lacquers and varnishes, adhesives. They emit this trichloroethylene, and that Dracaena or the peace lily, they help to remove that from the air. So there is really a connection between the houseplants being in a space and pollutants being removed from the air. And here's this clean air study. It is actually online. Interior landscape plants for indoor air pollution abatement. It's an older study, but still very applicable to today. And like I said, NASA did it. So the results suggested that certain common indoor plants may provide a natural way of removing toxic agents from your air. and help alleviate that sick building syndrome. Really good excuse to have houseplants in your office and houseplants at home. Now, I'm going to review a few of the definitions because I'm going to talk about these things as we go on, requirements for some plants. So when I say direct light that's when you put your plant right next to a window and you have the light shining directly onto the plant. Very often a south or a west window, but that depends on the trees around your house. Indirect light is your plant is near a window, but the light isn't shining right on it. Perhaps it's on the windowsill, but you have a sheer curtain between the plant and the direct sunlight. Moderate sunlight is several feet away from the window, and low light, it can be in the middle of the room with no real light coming from outside, just the overhead lights or the lights that are in the room. So when we talk about houseplants, or when you look and you purchase a houseplant, it might tell you what kind of light it needs. And these are the terms it's going to say. So familiarize yourself with these terms so that you know you're giving your houseplant adequate light. And then temperature, cool temperature is 55 to 65 degrees. Usually in the winter, your house is warmer than that. But when you're thinking about maybe taking your plants outside, you want to make sure it doesn't drop below 55. Many of these plants are tropical and they just won't do well in lower temperatures than that. Your average temperature for houseplants, which many houseplants prefer, 65 to 75. And that's about, if you think about what your house is during the wintertime, usually I keep my house at about 68 degrees. That's an average temperature. And then on the warm side is that 75 to 85 degrees. And there are many tropical plants that really thrive in that higher heat and that humidity. So keep these in mind when we're talking about the plants that I'm going to discuss. So the English ivy is one of our indestructible houseplants. Now, again, I'm going to stop here and say, is there such thing as an indestructible houseplant? Not really. Houseplants are living things, and there are certain, if you don't take care of it, if you don't watch it, if you don't give it adequate sunlight or water, it's going to die. But there are a lot of plants that really will take a lot of neglect before they give up the ghost. English ivy is one of them. Now, this is a variegated English ivy, very beautiful, often used in a container or a window garden type of thing as your trailer. It gets 1 to 3 feet long. It will trail. The nice thing is it likes that indirect to direct sunlight. So remember, indirect, it's near the window, but the sun is not shining directly on it. So this needs a little bit more sunlight than putting it in the middle of your room. It grows best in cool temperatures, does not want to be too hot. It wants that medium humidity. So the problem in Minnesota, of course, is in the wintertime, we're very dry. So that medium humidity, think about putting it in a kitchen or if it needs even more than medium humidity in your bathroom. Hopefully you will have some sunlight coming in and you will have the humidity, especially during those winter months, to keep this very happy. It wants average water. So you want to keep your plants evenly moist. And we'll talk a little bit about watering later, but you don't want it to dry out too much. English ivy really doesn't like to get too dry. And then your propagation, you can take a cutting from this plant and dip it in rooting hormone and put it in soil, and it will grow you a whole new plant. So that's kind of nice too. You don't have to buy a whole lot of plants. You can propagate from the plant you already have. Golden Pathos is one of my favorite plants because this just grows and grows. It's got these leaves that are variegated yellow. I've seen them variegated in white as well, 3 to 10 feet tall. And actually it's trailing. So if you don't support it with something, it will hang down instead of growing up. Low to moderate sunlight. So that's really nice. But what you need to know is that low sunlight, if you put this plant in the middle of your room, you're going to lose some of that variegation. It's going to really go a dark green. It's not going to grow as quickly. It'll grow better if it's in moderate sunlight. And it grows best in those average temperatures. So we're talking that 65 to 75. Doesn't like it cool. It won't grow as quickly or grow at all. It might go dormant if you keep it cooler. That low to medium humidity, which is nice because this does very well in the wintertime in Minnesota. and it likes dry to average soil. So you're going to allow that plant to dry out between waterings. And so how do you know when you need to water? Well, you stick your finger in up to your first knuckle. And if the fingertip still feels moisture, then you do not water. With this, you can take it even a little further. You don't want it to be so dry that the pot is light, but you do want it to dry out a little bit between waterings. This is another one of those plants that you can propagate from stem or tip cutting. So you can either cut it all the way down to the soil level and propagate that stem. These I have just put in water or in the soil. They will create roots coming off that stem. Or again, you can get a rooting hormone, dip the tip in that and put it in soil and it will grow. These are prolific. I started with one plant 12 years ago, and now I have probably 5 from the same plant. You can give them a haircut if they get too long and take all of those clippings and turn them into new plants. So golden Pathos is a really nice one to have. Boston fern, I haven't had as much luck with them. And I kill it with kindness. They get 1 to 3 feet tall. They have a really nice rounded habit. They like moderate to indirect light. And so that in the window or not in the window, but a few feet from the window. They grow best in those average temperatures. They like that low to medium humidity. So that's really nice again in our Minnesota winters. And dry to average soil. So let that soil dry out moderately again between waterings. Very often, depending on where you're located, you can just time your watering for once a week. I have houseplants in my office that sit right above my radiators. So they tend to dry out a lot more quickly than those in my house. So you just need to know your environment, how quickly those houseplants dry out, and how often you need to water them. Your propagation again is stem and tip cutting. So this also propagates very easily. I know people who just have a house full of Boston ferns, just beautiful, beautiful plants. I really like the dragon tree. It's also known as Dracaena marginata, and or corn plant. And they can get really tall. The nice thing about dragon trees is they come in all sorts of colors and all sorts of sizes. They have this upright habit. They like that moderate to indirect sunlight, and they grow best in warm to average temperatures. So remember, average is 65 to 75, and warm is higher than that. So they do like it warm. They do like that moderate to indirect sunlight, and they like low to medium humidity. So if you give it a little bit more sunlight, a little warmer temperatures, and a little bit more humidity, this plant will thrive. You're watering it again, that dry to average. So let it dry out a little bit between waterings. And then propagation is by air layering, so that you wrap the stem with a moist, either moss or a moist cloth, and it will start to root right where you've wrapped it. Or you can do stem and tip cutting. And what I've done with these Dracaenas, if they get long and gangly, because they will become a stick on the bottom and just a poof of leaves on the top, I've cut it back and rooted that. And then it sprouts from the bottom, and more leaves from the bottom, and then roots from the top. So you can get 2 plants out of one. The problem with many plants, and what will inhibit their ability to take in the sun and the resources they need, is that their foliage gets dusty. That happens. I'm living in an old house in Minnesota, and it happens all the time. And you want to wash the foliage just gently, monthly, to remove the dust. This isn't as big an issue for me during the summer, because all my plants go out and live on my porch in the summertime. But in the winter, it can be a real issue. And you want to make sure that you're not washing it with softened water, because that softened water will damage the plant. If you don't have softened water, you can put it in a very light shower in your tub, and that will help to wash the foliage. Washing the foliage on a Dracaena is pretty challenging, though, because there are a lot of leaves on it. So just carefully, gently do it, making sure it doesn't get too dusty, because the dust will block the sun from the plant. Now, I just wanted to show you, there are all sorts of varieties of Dracaena. The striped Dracaena on the left, that's just a green and white variegated foliage. And it has much thicker leaves than the pink one that we had on the page before. And then the one on the right is just a solid green. You'll see them all over the place. And if you look here, the one on the left is in a hallway. So it doesn't get a lot of light, but it does very well there because it's got the lights from overhead. Now, a parlor palm is also a very popular palm, popular houseplant. You'll see these, many of these in like the food courts of the malls. And so when you look at the food courts in the malls, if you can see what kind of plants are growing there, those are the ones who really thrive in low light. Those are the ones you might want to have in an office that doesn't have a window or in the center of a room in a house. These grow best in average temperatures. They like that medium humidity. And again, allow that soil to dry out between watering. They don't want to be too wet. The propagation for this is from seed. I would not, you might want to try doing it from seed, but you can pick these up as little tiny plants in just about every place I've been, big box stores and hardware stores and nurseries and garden centers. So go find yourself a beautiful parlor palm and just make sure that you have a place, if it's not getting good sunlight in your room, make sure you have a place that you can take it to a couple times a week where it will get sunlight. Now, I love a peace lily. Peace lilies are pretty bomb-proof. They're pretty indestructible because they let you know when they need water. They like that low to moderate, indirect, so a lot of different sunlights for this peace lily. Grows best in average temperatures, low to medium humidity. So all of those things are just excellent. It means that the care isn't as demanding. These plants aren't as demanding to take care of. So you want to make sure that you keep the soil moist. And so this is different from the others, but the leaves will droop when the plant is dry. The minute you see those leaves starting to go down, you make sure you water them. You don't want to wait until then all the time to water, but if you do, if you see your plant drooping a little bit, give it a drink because that's what it's telling you. It'll tell you when it needs water. And if you get a plant as big as this one, you can divide it and propagate it. I have done that with several of my peace lilies. The trick to getting it to bloom is to make sure it gets more sunlight, warmer temperatures, and adequate watering. And I rescued one of these off the step of a church one time. They were giving it away, and it had been exposed to fairly cold temperatures. And as soon as I brought it inside, watered it, put it in sun, and got it warm, it bloomed like this. So if you like the way the peace lily looks, if you like these blooms, and if you want a plant that really does well in a variety of environments, this is a good one to start with. This is a good one to give as a gift. The lady palm is another one you'll see. This is a picture of one in a mall in the food court. And it again has the upright, but it has a different shaped leaf, kind of like a hand-shaped leaf than the parlor palm. Low, moderate, direct. So look at that. It's got a variety of sunny locations or non-sunny locations where it will do well. It does like those average temperatures, 65 to 75 degrees. Here's where that humidity is important. It does want that medium humidity. And so this is one that you're going to want to provide if you have it inside in the winter in Minnesota, a more humid environment. Again, that a bathroom, probably not, because these can be very big, but maybe in your kitchen if you can put it there. It likes average water, so you're going to allow that soil to dry out a little bit between watering. And again, the propagation is by seed. Now, if any of you listening are a child from the 70s, like I was, this is a favorite, bomb-proof, pretty much anybody can grow a spider plant. Now, saying that, for the past several years, I've had a real hard time keeping a spider plant alive, but I think that was, I inherited the plant and I think there were more problems with it than I thought. So spider plants get 1 to 2 feet high. However, they put these shoots, these little plantlets that grow off of them, and you can get a plant that's doing really well that has 50, 100 plantlets, and they're really long hanging plants. They low light, moderate light, indirect light. I have one of these growing in my office. It is not anywhere near my window, but it's doing beautifully. Grows best in those average temperatures. So really, that's something most of us can maintain during the year. And the humidity, medium humidity, I can tell you because these plants are clustered in a pot, their humidity just by having all of that leaf material together is increased. The relative humidity within that center of that plant. You can propagate by divisions, by those offshoots, those little plantlets, and it's one of the easiest houseplants to grow. I have seen spider plants that are solid green, and then this is the spider plant that most of us are familiar with that has the green margin and the white center. You can grow it in just about any kind of container. You can hang it, you can grow it upright, but eventually it's going to produce these little plantlets, these little spiders that come off of it. So you probably want it to be somewhere where those will hang down. Now, I have a funny story about a sansevieria, a snake plant. It's also known as mother-in-law's tongue. And they grow pretty tall. So you can get a little tiny one that's 6 inches tall, or one that's much taller, 4 feet tall. It has this upright habit, and the sunlight low to direct, doesn't care. I can tell you that if you're getting one that's more colorful, one that's variegated, one that has yellow margins on it, you're going to want it to get more sunlight to keep that color. But if you don't mind it going all green or being a little darker in color, you can keep it in low sunlight. Grows best in warm temperatures, but doesn't mind the humidity, low to medium humidity, dry to average water, and you can propagate it by division. You can cut the leaf and stick the leaf in rooting hormone and in soil, and it will grow a new plant. And my funny story about a snake plant, now they like to be pot bound, and they will tell you when they don't want the pot because their roots are so strong. I got this that was in a gallon pot. I inherited it actually from a nursery that was closing, and it had burst through this hard plastic gallon pot. The roots had. So that's when we knew it had to be divided. And so you can pull it out of the pot and tease the roots apart and you have new plants, or you can just pot it up one size higher and it will do very well. Well, I brought this plant home, I repotted it, and I put it out on my back porch in June and promptly forgot I put it there. And it wasn't until August that I remembered the plant. Now, we did have rain. It was in a covered, shaded site with lots of trees, but that porch, when it rained, it got a little bit of moisture. That I did not take care of that plant, did nothing for it from June to August. And it was just as healthy and thriving as it was the day I put it out there. So a mother-in-law's tongue or a sansevieria, that's one that will do really, really well. If you really don't want to have a lot of maintenance, and you just want to put an upright plant somewhere, maybe in an office, maybe on a table, a sansevieria is the way to go. Now, I've been told, I keep forgetting to change this picture. This is not a picture of an aloe vera, but you all know what an aloe is. Again, if you're a child of the 70s, aloe vera was something you always had in your kitchen because this is the one you break the leaf off and you can treat burns with it, and it works very well. 6 to 18 inches tall, and that is true. It's got that upright habit, but it also will spread apart, and the top will be much heavier than the roots. So you want to manage the pot that it's in and make sure the pot has some weight to it. My aloe was huge and it kept tipping over. So I cut it all back, and now I have all sorts of little plantlets. It grows best in those average temperatures and low humidity. So you wouldn't think that in a kind of a succulent plant, but an aloe can tolerate very low humidity, dry soil. I let my aloe dry out completely before I water it. I don't want it to get too light because it will tip over. And then in the wintertime, I water it maybe once a month. You want to give it enough water so the roots don't die, but you don't need it to have too much water because it doesn't need it in the winter. You propagate with division or offshoots. Like I say, I have all sorts of little babies in my aloe plant now that I can tease out and give away to people. And the aloe that I got was actually a little baby that somebody else gave me. So once you have an aloe plant, if you take care of it, you're going to have all sorts of aloe to give to people. And aloe is so good for a lot of different things. You can go, if you're into homeopathy, you can look and see all sorts of recipes. I've used my aloe gel. I make my own soaps and my own salves, and I've used aloe in that as well. So aloe is a really nice thing to have at home. Really easy plant to take care of. So now we're going to talk a little bit more. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about the things that you need to provide for your plant to keep it healthy. Again, I said indestructible houseplants. Yes, there are some that are a lot easier to grow than others, but if you don't take care of these 5 different things with your houseplant, any houseplant, you're not going to have good luck with it. So the 5 roadblocks are insufficient light, improper watering, insufficient humidity. We haven't talked about fertilization yet, but improper fertilization can be a roadblock, and unsuitable potting medium. So the potting medium is that soil or soilless mix that you put in your pot to help it grow. And that can be kind of confusing because there's a lot out there to look at. So light is the greatest limiting factor growing houseplants indoors. And we talked about those different different definitions for moderate and indirect and low light. So often you want the exposure, you want to think about your exposure. And a southern or western exposure, if you don't have any trees, that might be perfect. But if you have trees there, that might be the shadiest spot of your house. So find a spot in your house that has good light coming through all day long. Again, my office is in the basement of a building, but I have a western facing window that is actually in a window well. And I can put my houseplants up there and it gets really nice light in the summertime, in the spring and summer. The distance from the light source we talked about, so that direct light, it's right in the window and it has light shining on it. Moderate light, it's either coming through that sheer curtain or it's a few feet away from the window. So the light is still there, but the sun isn't directly on it, or the indirect light, which would be in the, or the low light, which would be in the center of the room. You want to think about your distance from that light source, the window coverings you have, and whether your windows are clean or not, because that will filter the sunlight. That dust on the leaves that we talked about will inhibit the sun from doing its job with that plant. The time of year, of course, because, we have hardly any sunlight at all in December, but then starting in about June 20th, that's the longest day of the year. So think about that too, and how that changes and how you might need to move the plant based on where the sun is in the sky and how much sun we get. And then artificial light actually does count as light. It's not sunlight, and it doesn't even have to be a special plant light, but artificial light will provide more light. So on the darkest days of the year, if you have an overhead light near something, or it's exposed to artificial light that way, and even if you want to go and buy a special plant light that's broad spectrum, that will help to increase the light your plant gets. So think about the things that you can do that will provide the correct light that you need for the house plant. Now, this is what insufficient light looks like. This is, I'm pretty sure this is a basil plant. Basil is one of the easiest plants to grow, but if it's not getting good light, it will start to stretch out to reach for the sun, and you will see this big space on the stem between the leaves. It'll be small leaves. The growth will be spindly. It'll look weak. You might lose leaves. There won't be any flowering, or if it is a flowering plant and it forms buds, the buds may drop. And here's where I told you that if it's not getting bright light, if it's variegated, it might revert to solid green because the light helps the variegation pop out. Now, too much light, you'll start seeing the tips of the leaves maybe curl. You might see sun scald. So the plant can get sunburned. You'll see brown or yellow blotches on the leaves. And if it gets too much light, those leaves may start looking white almost. So they'll fade to a much lighter color than they're supposed to be, or they may just turn brown and die. So think about that as well. If you have a plant that prefers a medium light and you put it in a bright, direct sunlight, if you put it outside in the summertime and it's getting direct light, that you're going to see sun scald on that plant and it's not going to be healthy. The duration of the light is really important too, depending on the plant. So if you have just foliage plants, 12 to 16 hours a day is okay. And if you think about that, of course, in the wintertime, we don't get that. So that's where the artificial light comes in. African violets want 12 to 14 hours a day. And gloxinias, that's the one that we see here in the picture, they want more to get it to bloom. So if you have a blooming houseplant that isn't blooming, you probably want to give it a little bit more light. If you have a foliage plant that just isn't thriving, see if you can move it a little closer to your light source and see if that helps. Now, cuttings don't need quite as much light because they're not focusing on foliage development so much as they are root development. So you can put them in an area that doesn't get quite so much light. The other thing is 1,000 to 2,000 foot candles. So sun-loving plants need that intensity of 1,000 to 2,000 foot candles. So that's 440-watt fluorescent tubes at 10 inches. Provide 600 foot candles. So think about that. Those that really like a lot of sun, if it says direct sunlight, make sure they're getting direct sunlight. If you're using artificial light, make sure that you have the light close enough to the plant. And again, if it's a flowering plant and it's not flowering, it probably needs more sunlight. Now, improper watering, particularly overwatering, is the biggest killer of houseplants. And I think I said before, I have killed my plants with kindness. The Boston fern, I have killed that with kindness more often than not. It's, to me, a fern grows in the understory of trees, in the forest floor, the duff on the forest floor that's always moist, shady and moist. And that's not necessarily true. You can't make those assumptions about your houseplants. You want to know what that plant requires. And remember, when I talked about those indestructible houseplants, many of them like to be dry. That Boston fern likes to be dry. It likes to dry out between waterings. And back to my Sansevieria, my mother-in-law's tongue that I had, I took it into the office and then went on vacation for 2 weeks. And my kind office staff watered all my plants while I was away. And my mother-in-law's tongue overwatered and died. The roots rotted out because it got too much water. So I like my funny cartoon there. I think we have a possible case of death by overdose. Probably in most cases, the reason your houseplants are not doing well is because they're being overwatered. And the factors that affect the frequency of watering are the type of plant you have, the type of container you have, the humidity in the air, the temperature, that stage of plant growth. So little plants, they need less water than bigger plants, but they need it more frequently because those roots, the root system isn't as big. They need less water, but more frequently. The bigger the plant is, the more water they need all at once, but less frequently. And then the potting medium you have, all of these things impact how often and how much you should water a plant. And this is where you really get to know your plant, you get to know your container, and you pay attention to the plant and what it's doing with the watering you're doing. So the biggest thing the biggest hurdle you have to get over when you're doing, when you're watering your plant is an underwatered and an overwatered plant. A lot of the symptoms are the same. So underwatering, you get drier brown leaf tips or margins, the leaves turn brown and they die. Well, overwatering, the lower leaves turn yellow and die. They drop off. So you might look at a plant and say, well, it's wilting, it's stunted, it's not growing well, I must need to give it more water. When what you're doing is you're overwatering it, you're causing root rot. Those roots can't take up the water that the plant needs, and it's wilting and it looks bad. So knowing your plant, knowing how much water it needs, and knowing how the environment dries out that soil is something, if you get on top of that, you will really know when and how much to water. Now your watering methods, you water when the plant needs it, feel the soil. And remember I said, you're going to stick your finger in up to the first knuckle. The tip, because the top of that plant is going to dry out a lot faster than within the pot. If it's up to the first knuckle and you feel moisture there, then you don't need to water it. Now, the trick is sometimes it's hard to tell if you're feeling moisture or if you're just feeling cool soil. So that is, again, that's something you need to learn about your plant. You want to use water at room temperature. I live on a farm. We have a hydrant. We have well water. And so the water that comes out of our well, especially in the middle of the winter, is very cold. So you want to let that water sit overnight so it attains room temperature. And if you're taking chlorinated water, city water, you want to allow it to stand for 24 hours so the chlorine dissipates. You never want to use softened water on your plants because the salt in that water will build up in the soil over time and will eventually do harm to your plant, will keep your plant from growing, will make it just look sick. So if you don't have an option where your water is not softened, go and pick up a couple bottles of water from Walmart or your local store. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be distilled water. Or for me, I have a reverse osmosis spout on my kitchen faucet, and I use that water to water my plants with if I'm not bringing it in from outdoors. There are different watering methods. Some require consistently moist soil. Some require the soil to dry out. You want to avoid watering the foliage. The foliage is not what wants to water the roots are. You want to water your plant and let the water run through, especially if it's dry. A lot of these potting mixes will be hydrophobic. They won't really absorb the water. So what I do with my plants is I water them and I put a dish under them. I let that water run through. I take what's in the dish and pour it through and put the dish underneath it again and let the water run through. Sometimes you're going to have to do that 2 or 3 times, depending on how dry the soil got. You never want that plant to sit in water for more than about 10 minutes. So let it sit in water. After 10 minutes, dump the water out. Now, my history with African violets is you always let it sit in water, you let it bottom water. You don't want the leaves of the African violet to get wet, but you also don't want it to sit in water for very long. African violets are testy. You don't want it to develop root rot, but you also don't want it to get too dry. You want it to get enough sunlight so that it stays blooming. So know your plant, know what kind of moisture it wants, and make sure that you're watering it in the right spot at the right time, and really letting the whole soil ball within that pot get moist, not soaking wet. If it's overwatered, if it's sitting in water, you're getting rid of the air pockets in the soil. Your plant needs that oxygen as much as it needs the water. So don't let it be waterlogged. Let it drain out of the bottom and dump it out. But make sure you moisten the whole ball of soil, the whole root ball, so that every bit of that root ball is bringing up the moisture that the plant needs. The basic rule of watering is when in doubt, don't do it. Because remember, overwatering is the biggest killer of plants. You don't want it to get root rot. You don't want it to be the soil to be too saturated. You want it to be just right. Remember back when I was going through these plants, I classify some plants as Goldilocks plants. They're the ones that are really hard to take care of. The ones I gave you aren't Goldilocks plants, but they still need the amount of water they need. Let it dry out, or don't overwater it. Know what your plant needs to take care of it the best way. And if you go to a big box store and you purchase a plant, sometimes all the tag says is houseplant. It doesn't tell you what kind of houseplant. So know your houseplants, know the kind of plant you're getting, and make sure that you know exactly what the requirements for that houseplant are. If you get a generic label that says houseplant, do some research and find out what kind of plant it is beforehand, or go to a nursery that's going to tell you what kind of plant it is. Now, the soils. Soil provides both nutrients and physical support for the plant. And if you look here, you've got different kinds of soils in these pots. The one on the left looks like it's growing a lot of weeds really well. The one on the right's got a lot of kind of wood chips and things like that in it. So you can get an all-purpose potting soil. And this picture is just an example of a potting soil that you can get. And I'm saying potting soil, but a lot of them, they don't have soil in them. They have a mix that's sterile. And you want to look for a sterile mix, because that way you're not introducing insect eggs or disease, fungal disease, anything like that in it. A lot of these soilless mixes will be a combination of peat moss, compost, bark, perlite, sand, vermiculite, all sorts of different combinations to benefit the plant. They will retain moisture. Some of them have these moisture beads that help to retain moisture. Some of them have fertilizers built right into it. So know the soil you're getting, know the potting medium you're getting. And what I would say is this is one time where you don't want to buy the cheapest potting soil on the shelf. Get a good quality one, perhaps one that is a national brand and that lists exactly what's on it, so that you know that you are getting a potting mix that's going to benefit your plants. There are those specialty potting mixes out there. There are mixes for orchids, which have a lot of bark in it, cacti, which have a lot of sand in it, azalea potting mix that's got a higher acidity available. Bromeliads are those beautiful plants. I think I had a picture of them that need a certain kind of potting mix. You can spend a lot of money on all of these different potting mixes. And I can tell you, for the most part, if you water them correctly, you don't have to worry about the potting mix that you have, because like if you need a more acidic soil for those azaleas and things like that, you can add that with your fertilizer. If you need a drier soil for your cacti, then you just be careful about how you're watering it. Or you can go and buy the different potting mixes that help to support those specific plants. That is entirely your choice. Now, I want you to remember that fertilizer companies are in the business of selling fertilizer. And they will tell you to fertilize your plant every 2 weeks from March to September. What I'm going to tell you is fertilize your plants every 2 weeks or once a month during the growing season at about half strength. I fertilize my plants. I use a compost tea. It's an organic fertilizer that comes from a company called Sustain, and it's like a tea bag. And I just keep that tea bag in my jug that I use to water my plants with, and I water them every week or so with that. It's half strength. It provides the fertility they need, and they do really well during the growing season. You only want to use these fertilizers when plants are actively growing. So in about September, October, I stop fertilizing them because I do not want them to grow in the winter months. It takes a lot of energy for plants to continue growing in the winter months. I want them to go dormant so that I can keep them cooler and so that the reduced amount of sunlight that they get won't impact the health of the plant. Plants that are grown under fluorescent lights, if you have a special grow light and it's on year round, that means that plant is growing year round. Then you need to fertilize them year round. So you need to decide what you want to do with your plants. To be honest, I let all of my plants go dormant in the winter months. So October through about April, March, April. March, April is the time I will pot up my plants and I will give them their first boost of fertilizer. Depends on what the weather's like. And it also depends on what my schedule is like, how much time I have for them. I have a lot of houseplants. No, I don't pot every one of them up every year. And most houseplants do like to be root bound. They like to have that nice tight container. So it's not an every year type of thing. It's when it's needed. Insufficient fertility will give pale foliage, because it's lacking in nitrogen. You might lose some leaves. You will have very few flowers, and the plant may look stunted and unhealthy. What does that look like? Insufficient sunlight and insufficient watering as well. So it's sometimes hard to tell what's going on. Over-fertilization will cause hard, stunted growth. It might burn your leaf margins, might have poorly shaped leaves or wilted leaves. So again, what does that look like? It looks like too much sun, not enough sun, or over or under watering. So a lot of these symptoms overlap. The trick is, if you have fertilized a plant that is still wilted, even when the soil is wet, often it means you put too much fertilizer in it. The other thing is, if you have a plant that is suffering, adding fertilizer to it might not be the thing to do, because if fertility is not your problem, you could be actually injuring your plant because your plant can't take up that fertilizer like you expect it to, and it could end up burning the roots or burning the foliage. So diagnose the problem in your plant before you add fertilizer, and make sure you don't fertilize too often, because doing that can do more damage than good to your plant. Again, killing it with kindness. The humidity we have talked about, desert plants prefer dry air. Tropical plants miss their rainforest, but do not assume that all cacti are desert plants. Some of them grow on tropical floors. Don't assume that all colorful plants are tropicals. So know your plant, know where it came from, so that you know the kind of humidity. To increase your humidity, especially in the wintertime, place plants together. My mother-in-law always placed plants in a big tray with pebbles in it that was filled with water. So the plants weren't sitting in water, they were sitting above the water, and the water helped to humidify the air. If you group plants together in the wintertime, and that's what I do, just the relative humidity with those plants being close together is increased. For those plants that really want it humid, I put them in the bathroom or the kitchen. I take very hot showers, especially in the wintertime, and my bathroom steams up. My plants that love the humidity love that. You can try running a humidifier in the area where you have plants. You want to make sure you move them away from heating vents, because they will dry out so much faster. You can put them in terrariums if you're really concerned about that. Put them under glass. And then I allow my plants to spend the summertime outside. You know, we have really humid summers and they do really well outside. Or you can choose a plant that doesn't require a lot of humidity. Then you don't really have to worry about that. We're going to talk a little bit about suitable containers. You want it to be large enough to hold sufficient soil that allows proper watering. You want a non-toxic container that has adequate drainage and that doesn't take away from the plant. So remember, the container is just adding to the look of the plant, making it perhaps fit in with all the other plants. But you also want that container that's not going to tip over with the weight of that plant. So you want to choose a container that's heavy enough, that's going to hold enough soil, that's not going to have the plant wallow, the roots wallow in this massive space, but it's not going to take away from the plant. Clay pots are heavy, which could be a good or a bad thing. Overwatering is less of a problem, but they are porous, and so they will dry out quite a bit faster than plastic pots. They are breakable. You do not want them to be sitting outside in the wintertime full of soil. And they will also collect mineral salts or algae, so that that pot over time may not be as pretty as when you first put the plant into it. Plastic pots are great because they come in all different shapes, sizes, colors. If you want a color theme through your garden, you can choose the same colored pots. They're easy to use, easy to reuse. You can sterilize them between uses, but overwatering may be a problem. Plastic pots like the one on the left, which is made almost of a styrofoam material. It looks like a concrete pot, but it's very light. They tip over easily. So if you're putting a large plant in a large pot, well, the top might be heavier than the bottom. But they have a really, they can be pretty gaudy, or they can just have this very nice aesthetic appearance. So The nice thing about plastic pots too is that they're relatively inexpensive. So if you have a lot of houseplants, you can buy some nice pots that aren't going to break your bank. When you repot, take a look. If you look like you have more root than soil in your pot, probably means that you need to have, you need to pot up. If you need to water more than once a day, if your plant just continually wilts, if you can pull that plant out and that root ball stands on its own without a pot, you need a new pot, or if the plant does not respond to fertilizer. Now this plant, I think this is a, what's it called? Chinese evergreen maybe, is not doing well. You need to tease those roots, loosen them up so that you don't have circling roots, and put it in a pot one size bigger. Maintenance for all your houseplants, these coleus are beautiful, but you want to remove all the old or dead leaves. The entire leaf, not just the dead or damaged tissue. You're going to remove those faded flower buds. Or for the coleus, this has the flower buds or those spikes that grow up, remove those. The coleus is grown for the foliage, not for the flowers, and the flowers take energy away from the foliage. So think about that. You want to clean your houseplants because that optimizes the light. It makes it less attractive for insects. Also, as you're cleaning your houseplant, you're checking the tops and the bottoms of those leaves so that you can look for insects. You can look for damage. You can look for disease. The plants look better. Do not use products like Shine. I used to work in a greenhouse, and we always asked, would you like us to spray Shine on your plant? Well, think about that. It blocks the pores of the plants, and it provides a barrier for the sun to get to the leaves. Yes, they might look pretty, but it really doesn't benefit the plant at all. It just benefits the aesthetic appearance. And I don't like shiny leaves if the leaf is not supposed to be shiny. Don't use home remedies. You don't have to use dish detergent or anything like that. Just use a soft, dry cloth, or maybe just a little bit of water on there to wipe those leaves. It could be time consuming, but it's also, to me, it's very relaxing. And yes, I tend to talk to my plants as I'm cleaning them because I consider them all my babies. Examine your plants closely before purchasing to make sure they're healthy and you don't see signs of insects or disease. Isolate new plants for 2 weeks. Put them in a separate room from your other plants so that you don't, if insects or infestation pops up on the plant you bought, you're not passing it along to your new plants. If you find a plant that has disease, prune it off, treat that specific insect or disease in that plant, isolate that sick plant from your other plants. Never apply any chemicals to a moisture stressed plant. So if this plant has gotten too dry, it's wilting. If a plant is stressed, do not apply any chemicals, whether it's fertilizer or an insect killer or a disease, because that can do more harm than good. And avoid misting plants. That always used to be the thing, is you mist your plants to increase the humidity. Well, if your leaves are wet, that can increase, that creates an environment that bugs and insects love. I am not going to go into plant pests right now. What I am going to do is I am going to stop sharing. And I am back. And so, Esther, I'm going to ask you, we have like 6 minutes left. Do I have some questions out there from our audience?
Yeah, so I've been watching the chat here as you've been talking, Robin, and I don't see any questions just yet, but I would encourage folks to drop a question there in the chat if you do have a question, because Robin certainly knows a lot about the house plants.
Absolutely.
Myself, I happen to keep a couple succulent plants going, and that's about all I can muster. But
yeah, succulents are great, and I didn't touch really. Succulents is a whole other workshop in itself. But succulents are nice if you don't have a lot of time and you don't have a lot of light. I've had succulents living on my desk at work out of the sunlight and watering them once a week or so, and they're great plants. I will put a plug in for the book, Indestructible Houseplants. It's by Tova Martin. And if I have gardeners out there, Tova Martin might be a name that they're familiar with. She does a lot of really wonderful books. But that is a book that really covers a lot of different plants and how to take care of them. So if you're not sure what houseplant you have, or you get a houseplant, you know what kind it is, but you don't really know what it wants, get yourself a good houseplant book, because, well, what I'm going to do is show you my houseplants. Okay, so bear with me. So this is my variegated fig. If you can see that, it's not the greatest picture because I'm moving it around. That plant came to me, it had been abandoned at our county fair, and it was 2 sticks and a couple of leaves about 7 years ago. So never give up on a houseplant, because there are those that you can rescue. That being said, do not go on do not be my mom. She's 94 years old right now. She likes to go to rescue missions to Walmart and pick up sick houseplants. Don't do that, because she feels sorry for them. But if you do that, you can bring disease and insects into your home. So keep your houseplants healthy, know your houseplants, develop a relationship with your houseplants, because that's the best way of keeping them healthy.
So Robin, if folks do have questions following the end of this presentation, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Oh, please, I would say give me a call, the Douglas County Extension Office, and that's at 320-762-3890. And if you do that, if I'm not in the office, you can leave a message and I promise to get back to you. If you want to try and email me, and the great thing is this is being recorded, so you can listen to this a couple times. My email address is trot0053@umn.edu. The nice thing is I get my email on my handy dandy telephone, and so I will respond to that. Generally the same day you send it, you'll get some sort of answer from me. So either way is a good way. If you are in the Douglas County area and you have a houseplant that you just can't identify, give us a call and make an appointment, bring it in, and I can help you with it. I love houseplants, so always love to talk gardening and always love to talk plants.
And I actually do have a question here for you. So the question that was posed in the chat says, you mentioned that basil grows well indoors. I enjoy cooking with fresh herbs. What other herbs can you recommend?
Okay, so there are a lot of great herbs that you can grow in an herb garden. And I happen to love Italian herbs. So basil is an annual. Marjoram, there's an annual marjoram that I like to cook with. And I like rosemary indoors as well. Rosemary can be a little testy. And I would not bring rosemary from outdoors to indoors because I have brought spider mites in with my rosemary plant. But those 3 in particular, you can grow inside. The marjoram and the basil, you can start from seed. The rosemary, I would purchase a plant to do. Another one might be thyme. So it really, these plants want sun. So they want that moderate to direct kind of sunlight. Great if you have a kitchen window that you can put them in. They like the humidity in the kitchen, and then they're right there where you can use them to cook with. So I would definitely look and see what's out there in these herb garden kits. You can pick them up. We have a Fleet Farm in town, so you can go to Fleet Farm or Menards, or go online and find an herb garden kit and find the herbs that you really like. And then make sure that you've got the adequate light for them to grow, because they really do want a little more sunlight.
Okay, another question here for you. My prayer plant has brown tips. What could I be doing wrong? It is well watered and gets indirect light. Okay, and that's tough because a lot of things do get those brown tips. Brown tips can be a sign of overwatering. So let that prayer plant dry out. Not, remember, when I say it's drying out, it's not getting so the pot is so light you could, toss it out the window as you pick it up. Some of those pots get really light. You want it to still have weight. But you don't want it to be
moist when you water it. I would say the other thing is light, and indirect light is what a prayer plant wants. But those are the two things that come to mind. Either it's being overwatered or it's not getting quite enough light. So if it's praying at night, if it's closing up, that's good. It could also just be an indication, if it's the older leaves that are beginning to turn brown at the tip, it could just be that the leaves are getting old. So prayer plants tend to do that. Dieffenbachia does that like crazy. You'll get the leaves turning brown, and that's just what they do at the end of the day. And spider plants will turn brown at the tips as well, and that has to do with watering, adequate watering as well.
Well, thank you. It looks like that's all the questions in the chat. I did put your email down there, so if you're interested in reaching Robin, you can access that in the chat directly. Next month, our talk is on things to do with your spring waking garden or your yard, things that you need to do in the spring. So that'll be on May 19th. You can look for that. Again, thank you so much, Robin. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here today.
All right, so I just ended the